Senate. And some of the campaign volunteers are going to introduce this meeting with a canon that we're going to sing. It's called Shalom Chaverim. And the meaning of the text is, well, shalom can be translated as peace, hello, goodbye. So it's this friendly gesture, friends, until we meet again. Okay, so we'll sing it together once, yeah? Shalom, ready? Shalom. Shalom.
Thank you. I'll give everyone a minute to get seated. We're getting, oh, yes, okay. And I can be heard all right, Jose? Wonderful, okay. So clearly we are in an unbelievable moment in human history, and tomorrow we are told that organizers of the march in Washington against the genocide now occurring in Gaza is expected to be upwards of 30,000 people, and maybe more than that. I think this is of great interest because it has literally been 2 decades since you had any kind of anti-war movement in the United States, the last being, interestingly, over the invasion of Iraq. Did someone close that? Over the invasion of Iraq, which is similar to this atrocity occurring in Gaza, was supposedly a response to a terrorist attack. In other words, it was after 9/11, and even though everyone knew, and it was often stated that Iraq had nothing to do with 9/11, they tortured one poor guy into saying that somehow it did. And then we know Nancy Pelosi told us that everybody knew there were no weapons of mass destruction. Our friend Scott Ritter had come forward, warned about that. Nonetheless, we plunged ahead and killed 1 million people in Iraq. There were demonstrations. There were big demonstrations in London. There were big demonstrations in New York against this war. We failed to stop it. As I said, 1 million or so Iraqis were killed. Since that time, tens of millions of people have been displaced between all of the wars that followed that. And probably 12 to 14,000 Americans were killed, half of whom were active duty military, I think about 7,000 plus, and the number of contractors is about equal to that. Now, it may interest people to know that since 9/11, 2001, 30,000 soldiers have died of suicide. So 4 times the number of US military veterans have died of suicide than died in combat in these wars. So what does that tell you? And I think it tells you something about what is what we're seeing now, which is contrary to the efforts of the Congress for Cultural Freedom, the Tavistock Institute, the CIA, the drug agenda. We have someone who's a little angry downstairs, honking their horn. But contrary to their attempt to sort of decorticate people and get people to tolerate hideous crimes against humanity, the population can still be moved. And there still is a conscience. And frankly, I am greatly relieved by that. The question we have is, will it be enough? And I think what we've seen in the last days is that even people who are complete evil bastards, like Senator Chris Murphy of Connecticut, has nonetheless felt obligated to call on Israel to perhaps change their approach, that perhaps it is not helpful for them to be killing so many civilians. It's okay? Okay, good. I'm glad I can be heard over that honking. So I don't know what will happen tomorrow. It wouldn't surprise me if more people showed up than they are expecting. It also wouldn't surprise me if there are provocateur operations. We're seeing this all over the place. We're seeing particularly, unfortunately, Hamilton's old newspaper, the New York Post, playing an absolutely despicable role in this crisis, feeding into the recent resolution passed by the US Senate, which basically said it's against anti-Semitism and support of Hamas on campuses. And it passed by voice vote without one single senator voicing opposition against student groups that are supposedly pro-Palestinian, basically saying that they are all supporting Hamas terrorism and must be condemned. And as people may know, in Florida, Governor DeSantis has actually banned all Palestinian support groups on college campuses. So you have this kind of extremism where people are being led to believe that they are mortal enemies or someone will hate them. And I think that's what we saw at Columbia, where you have the Accuracy and Media truck driving around with pictures of the hostages, but also photographs of any student who has written a letter or participated in a protest against the genocide, attempting to intimidate people and equating all of those people with Hamas, the terrorist attack. And the New York Post covered some of the first marches in New York as being pro-Hamas protesters, pro-terrorism protesters. So now you have the undeniable fact that thousands of Palestinians have been killed. The official count as of now is 9,200 Palestinians. Those are the ones that have been identified and named. 3,600 children, over 2,000 children under the age of 12 have been killed in this. And so the tide is beginning to turn, but what you also have is inflammatory propaganda saying that, well, we should just wipe out Israel. They got what they deserved. So that what I found at Columbia, for example, and I think it's very widespread, is everyone was terrified because the Jewish students who largely did not support the atrocities going on in Gaza, nonetheless were worried that everyone would think that they did, and therefore they were in danger. And the students, the Muslim students, are terrified that everyone thought that they were supporters of Hamas terrorism. And in reality, and I think particularly among younger people, everybody wonders why this killing has to continue. The Hamas were elected in 2006, so that is 17 years ago, is that right? Yeah, 17 years ago. So anyone under the age of, let's see, 35 in Gaza was not involved in voting to elect Hamas. So these children who are being killed have never voted. Yet we are being told it is legitimate to kill them. And we had our genius senator from South Carolina, Lindsey Graham, go so far as to say that it was no problem bombing a refugee camp and killing hundreds because supposedly one Hamas commando was in there and no one knows whether they really killed him or not. And would that be justified anyway? And what Lindsey Graham said, well, Hiroshima and Nagasaki are the model. Of course, if it took annihilating everyone in Japan and everyone in Germany to stop Adolf Hitler or to stop Japan, that would be legitimate. Now, how is it that a member of the US Senate can say that and they are not run out of town on a rail? How is it that someone in the US Senate can say that and little men in white coats don't come and carry them away to a rubber room in some asylum where they can be protected? So what we have come to consider normal in this country is actually insane. And what is normal are the people who are now in the streets because their conscience will not allow them to tolerate this one more minute. The people don't want the mass slaughter of children and civilians occurring in their name, and they don't want retribution, and they don't want revenge, and they don't want a perpetual state of war. That is what should be normal. Now, the concern and the reason why I wanted Daniel to speak about Nicholas of Cusa and De Pace Fide, and Kynan to speak about the poetic process of the interventions, is because I think that the fact that people are protesting indicates that we are perhaps on the cusp of a really major change. We shouldn't let up. It hasn't happened. We have to accelerate. We have to push this through. But suppose that public opinion creates such a scandalous uproar that a ceasefire were to occur. And we have to make sure that happens. But then what? And what is the policy? And how can you ensure a lasting peace? And here is the sacred mission of those of us living in the United States. Because none of these atrocities going on in the world right now would be possible if the United States were functioning as a constitutional republic as our founding fathers intended. That this is occurring because the United States, particularly since the assassinations of the 60s and the cover-up and the Vietnam War, very importantly, and the witch hunt against America's greatest son, Lyndon LaRouche, were allowed to stand. The United States has now, in effect, been fully taken over by the British Empire. So the United States is now carrying out exactly what the British Empire intended to do, which we were an obstacle to in the past. Now we are the facilitator and the enforcer of everything the American Revolution was against. And in the United States, the most powerful branch of government is the fourth branch of government, which is the people. And this is why Lyndon LaRouche called out the Congress for Cultural Freedom, the shift in the 60s, because he knew that that would be decisive in perverting the ability of the United States to function. This is also why George Washington, in his farewell address, emphasized that you must have an educated citizenry. He emphasized the importance of religious belief, of morality. He emphasized the importance of culture because he was very clear that if the population became immoral, if the population became degenerate, then what protection did you have from the government becoming a depraved institution? So this is what we have. And therefore, rather than sitting back and complaining and saying, oh, the government is bad, what can we do? The point is to say, what is wrong with us that we have allowed it to get to this point. We are going to take back our responsibility as citizens of a republic, and we are going to fight to ennoble ourselves and our ideas so that we can make the republic reflective of what the founding fathers intended and do what it says in the Constitution, which is to perfect our union. As long as we're here in the flesh, we're never going to be perfect, but we can be in a process of infinite perfection, which is one of the happiest things that a human being can be involved in. So it's in that spirit that Helga Zepp-LaRouche recommended very strongly that people study this work of Cusa, and that's why I wanted to feature it tonight. And I would urge everybody who's watching online and here, if you have not read it or haven't read it recently, please pick it up and read it again, because I suspect that the amount of time tonight will not be sufficient for Daniel to feel that he's given us a completely thorough understanding of the work, but he will give us some ideas. So would you like to go ahead?
Thank you. Do you want to let me know around what time?
Sure.
Maybe that 30 minutes?
Yeah.
Okay. Should I wear this? No, okay. Hi. Hello. So there were a couple of different ways I was thinking about getting started, but let me just tell you that I would like to introduce you to Cusa, the person, and not merely to the piece, De Pace Fide, because you need context to really understand the significance of it. And yeah, my goal is to cause you to query whether it is true that there is only one wisdom, which is the central assertion in the opening part of De Pace Fide. So we'll come to that. But let me say that if you haven't read it, I passed out to some people in this room the Will Wirtz translation, and then I was reminded of the fact that Jasper Hopkins has an excellent translation on his website, which is superior. So anyone who's listening, you can look up this man, Jasper Hopkins, and then De Pace Fide, P-A-C-E, Pace, Fidei, F-I-D-E-I. And you can read the whole thing. I strongly recommend it. And the first section, the first several sections are really crucial on it. But Helga's whole emphasis on this, let me put it this way. What's the one of the most important things that has happened strategically was an announcement in the past couple of days of an agreement between the government of China and the government of Turkey that they will collaborate on a new translation process. They will be translating each other's classical works into each other's languages. This is the Global Civilization Initiative in action. And so when we talk about the issue of a global renaissance, think of it again. We're not, a small number of people in a room in Manhattan. That's not actually what's going on. There is a global renaissance that is happening, which is being advanced by the most powerful nation on the planet, China, most in terms of real power. And that process is organized specifically with a very coherent aim that is, I think you'll find, totally Cusanic. The aim of the Global Civilization Initiative is to bring about the community of shared future. And those of us who have had a chance to study these ideas and to have been to China we're really in a privileged position to be able to recognize that the strategy of creating a renaissance is actually, it's not just like the right thing to do. It's the most powerful thing to do right now. And that's understood by many leading people in the world. So what you really got to get a sense of what Cusa is operating in. I mean, you have Cusa's born 1401. Actually, let me go to the slides. I'm still sort of thinking on organizing the approach, but Jose, when you're ready, bring up the slides. Because I think Lyndon LaRouche does a just beautiful job of presenting what it is that's actually the issue. We must see ourselves as individuals, as potentially the embodiments of reason, as imago Dei. We must look into the faces of people around the world and see not different races or this or that distinction, but see in those faces, in those eyes, another human being who is also imago Dei, who has that potential within them, and seek to raise that potential within them, or to create the circumstances in which the ideas of doing good are presented more clearly to the individual, in which the opportunities for doing that good are more freely provided. If we do that, we are participating in creation. We are of value to mankind as individuals beyond all doubt. So again, in this best of all possible worlds, as Leibniz described it, let evil prompt us, not merely to deny evil, which we must do, we must denounce it as well as denying it, but let us be prompted by evil, as Schiller described the principle of tragedy. The tragedy of evil must be attacked, recognized, feared, and hated to such a degree that we are willing to do good, finally, to supplant the evil. And I think that that final concept in particular, it's a certain expression of LaRouche's outlook on the nature of the mass strike moment, so to speak, or the Renaissance in another way. I'm not sure exactly how to pin it down here. Wouldn't you agree that that last section describes very much the kind of dramatic change that's happening in the populations of the world right now? That there is such a great deep moral experience of the tragedy of evil, that the potential to find that to do good is irresistible. That's the potential, which need be actualized by sufficient conceptual leadership, right? You actually need to have leadership that embodies that if it's going to come to fruition. But the potential, I think it's there. I think that we have to operate from the hypothesis that it is there, and we approach the circumstance with the highest possible philosophical quality that we can, and then we see, can we unite ourselves around this kind of approach? Because I mean, the whole importance of the Schillerian idea of the ennoblement of the individual, could it possibly be more obvious that that's the situation today? When you saw that absolutely horrific, I don't even know how to describe it, but the parade of barbarian nincompoops who came through that Republican Jewish event, right, where you had Vivek Ramaswamy talking about putting heads on pikes, and you had Donald Trump saying, we're there all the way to the end with Israel no matter what, and then don't even talk about the morons like Nikki Haley, right? Or Mike Johnson, I think that's his name, right? The new Speaker of the House. He is a raving lunatic who is completely committed to the idea of end times, an end times cult, that therefore we need to support Israel so that we can have the second coming of Christ. So you have a willingness to fall to the absolute depths of moral capability, and we need to turn that around. Can you go to the next one, please? Anyone know what these are? I mean, obviously they're statues of Christ, the crucifixes, but who made them? First of all, what do you think? Obviously, I'm comparing them. There's no wrong answer, so just say what you think.
One looks more realistic, one on the left looks sort of You can see the vein increases in Jesus' body versus the one on the right looks more made flat. Also, he's clothed on the right.
Does anyone else want to say that?
The struggle is real, but his face is at peace. Both.
These are by two of the greatest artists of the Renaissance period in Italy. Brunelleschi on the left and Donatello on the right, if I remember correctly. And Brunelleschi made his because he was not happy with Donatello's. And I think that what you point out, Simon, is certainly true. He said that Donatello's looks like a fisherman, by which I think he meant like a worker, you know. And this is a more truthful conception to my mind, you know, that what power comes from this idea is not because Christ is not pathetic. He is pathetic in this situation. You know what I mean? He doesn't need to look more sturdy than he is, right? For him to be powerful. Anyway, I thought this was a useful comparison. You can go to the next slide. Oh, yeah, a little bit closer.
On the right feet. On the left is at peace.
Okay, you go. Okay, actually, cover it up for a moment. All right, so the idea, hello. Good. We're talking about Nicholas of Cusa, who was a great Renaissance figure. And he had a specific response, which people know. To return to the topic, there was the Crusades, the Venetian Empire system. These things have been going on for hundreds of years. You know, Cusa's born in 1401. He dies in like 1464. But this kind of problem goes back to the 1200s and, you know, earlier in other forms. And the problem is oligarchism. That's the whole problem, right? Is that you have a system of banking, the Lombard banking system. You have a system of maritime manipulation and control of things. And then the Venetians, what they do is that they recruit the monarchs of Europe into the Crusades so that they can drain the monarchs dry because they lend them the money. And at the same time, they can loot and rape and pillage in, you know, Asia Minor and so forth, and in the Ottomans later in the 1300s and otherwise, right? So you've had this back and forth sacking of Constantinople. You've had the Black Plague, right, in the 1300s, where you have this. There are some parts of Europe where you lose half or 2/3 of the population in a matter of decades. And on the whole, it's over a third. But imagine there are some pockets where things are just completely destroyed. You can read the Cameron for a bit of a view of this by Boccaccio. And why has oligarchism been in control? What are their powers? What's their tool? Like, to say it's the ships and the gun, you know, not the guns, but the weapons of war and so forth, that's obvious enough, but that's not it. Right? Just like we asked, why is the United States so insane? Why is the US government such a purveyor of violence? It's not because we have all of the weapons. That's not why. Right? And it turns out that the key thing that they were doing, the Venetians were financing the translation of Aristotle. And so they had a bunch of locations. I think the University of Bologna, which is the oldest one in Europe, for example, oldest university in Europe. They were working on this. It was also the University of Padua. And so there was an ideological control. There was a presentation of a core idea of the nature of wisdom, of reason, that gave them control over people. Because you don't have to worry about what people think, you just take care of how they think, right? So let's see the next slide. Yeah, this total domination of this kind of Aristotelian outlook. And what is it? Well, here's what Aristotle says in his posterior analysis. We've already said that scientific knowledge through demonstration is impossible unless a man know the primary immediate premises. How does man know? We must possess a capacity of some sort, which is at least an obvious characteristic of all animals. But they possess a congenital discriminative capacity, which is called sense perception. So our sense perception comes to be what we call memory, and out of frequently repeated memories of the same things develops experience. For a number of memories constitute a single experience. From experience, again, originates the skill of the craftsman and the knowledge of the man of science. Of course, that's the whole rationality for the people who say there will never be peace in the Middle East, right? In a very simple way, that's of course the core approach to it. Because man has always been at war, therefore he will always be at war, right? And very clearly, emphatically, it is our reasoning capacity, according to Aristotle, is that which we share with the animals, or at least derives from it, in this sense. So this is sort of the basic mode of thought that is typical when Cusa is coming up. And I always like to also make the point, Cusa is coming up, he visits Rome as a young man in his early 20s. He grows up in, people know where he's from? Present-day Germany, of course, that's what Cusa means, is Cus. It's the location. His name is Nicholas of Cusa. He's from Cus. And you can visit his home. I've been there with my wife. It's wonderful. Hey, Jamie. Really beautiful place on the Mosel River. But it's basically West Germany nowadays, right? It's in the western part of Germany, I need to say. And so he goes to University of Padua as a young man. And he's one of these people who goes down into the catacombs and finds the old texts and brings them out. And when he's 22, Aeschylus has been reintroduced into Europe. So imagine like everyone suddenly finding out about Prometheus Bound and then being able to read it, right? All of a sudden. So there's this huge excitement. The Duomo, the Santa Maria del Fiore is going up in Florence. Tremendous developments. He goes to Rome, though, and imagine this. In the early 1400s, there's only like 30, 40, 50, 60,000 people living in Rome. There were 1 million in 100 AD. So you've gone through 1,300 years of collapse of various types, various times. Sometimes you have growth, but in general, as you know from looking at the population chart, you basically have collapse, right? And of course, the Black Death contributed to that massively in the 1300s. So this is the situation in which he's up against, humanity is up against the basic tool of oligarchy, which is to convince you that the only way that you know truth is through your senses. So let's go to the next slide. Here's more from De Anima. Since according to common agreement, says Aristotle, there's nothing outside and separate in existence from sensible spatial magnitudes. Now, just look at that, right? According to common agreement, There's nothing outside and separate in existence from sensible spatial magnitudes. The objects of thought are all insensible forms, both abstract objects and all the states and affections of sensible things. Hence, no one can learn or understand anything in the absence of senses. And when the mind is actively aware of anything, it is necessarily aware of it along with an image, for images are like sensuous contents. While in respect of all other senses, we fall below many species of animals, in respect to touch, we far excel all other species in exactness of discrimination. That is why man is the most intelligent of all animals. So I'm not really, I mean, it's ridiculous, right? The whole thing is ridiculous. And particularly this, right? But why are they doing it? What is being blocked? What is being prevented? What is being maintained? Right? Let's go to the next slide. And this is a famous one everyone knows. Can you go to the next slide, Jose? Thank you. Oh, no, I missed it. I have them a little bit backwards from what I thought. Anyway, people know, this is from Cusa. People know that Aristotle, of course, said that some people are born slaves and some people are born masters, and that's how it should be, and that's how it always will be, and that's what it is, right? So what they're maintaining is, of course, the system of oligarchism. How do you beat it? I'm not expecting to read all of this, but I want to point out a little bit of it. Truth is not something more or something less, but is something indivisible. Whatever is not truth cannot measure truth precisely. A non-circle cannot measure a circle whose being is something indivisible. That's a crucial breakthrough. It's called the quadrature of the circle, as treated by Cusa. Hence, the intellect, which is not truth, never comprehends truth so precisely that truth cannot be comprehended infinitely more precisely. For the intellect is to truth as an inscribed polygon is to the inscribing circle. The more angles the inscribed polygon has, the more similar it is to the circle. However, even if the number of its angles is increased ad infinitum, the polygon never becomes equal to the circle unless it is resolved into an identity with the circle. Hence, regarding truth, it is evident that we do not know anything other than the following, namely, that we know truth not. Questions? First of all, this addresses the previous statement about sense perception. Because it is not the case that truth, according to this line of reasoning, is among a set of sensible objects, or that there is some image to which truth is appended, or justice, for example. But also, this is the whole argument of De Pace Fide. There is only one wisdom. Every religion presupposes the divinity. They approach it each from their different diverse approaches, each with their different traditions, each with their different rituals, each with their different prophets. But they all presuppose the idea that there is such a thing as divinity, as God, as one true God. And it's the same as in philosophy. The way that the De Pace Fide works is he says, first of all, let's turn to the philosophers. Isn't it the case that every philosopher is seeking one wisdom? It's just one wisdom that you're seeking. There aren't multiple of them. There's only one. And isn't it true that all of the religions are, in fact, in the same way, presupposing the one wisdom which could not be called other than God? And so it is fundamentally possible to establish dialogue among people of completely diverse civilizations and cultures around this principle of divinity, or of wisdom, or of goodness. Let's go to the next one. Oh, actually, I like this. Hold on. He says further. The quiddity of things, which is like the itness of things, the fact that the thingness of things, which is the truth of beings, is unattainable in its purity. Though it is sought by all philosophers, it is found by no one as it is. And the more deeply we are instructed in this ignorance, the closer we approach to truth. Cusa is writing this in 1432. And he describes that he gets an insight into this idea, which eventually he develops, and this is from a document called Didacta Ignorantia, Unlearned Ignorance. And he says, I came in a flash of insight to something that no one else has ever figured out before, and he was on the boat coming from Constantinople to Florence. What was he doing? You can cover it up, and I'll say a little bit more. Yeah, we can read it, but get in it more in depth. How is it that he developed this breakthrough in philosophy, and then later on, as expressed in 1453, in De Pace Fidei, in this form of dialogue of religions? What was he doing? Does anyone know? Huh?
Organizing.
He was organizing. He was organizing. He was organizing in the midst of an incredibly dynamic situation. I think it's like 14. I have my dates off a little bit right now, but anyway, there are a series of conferences. The Council of Florence comes after the Council of Basel. And these are councils that are happening amid like really wild situations. At one point, there were like 3 popes all at the same time, all of them claiming the right to be pope. And it was in like 1425 that Joan of Arc was imprisoned, and that they had her trial. And I think it's the same year the Council of Basel happened, because she tries to submit her testimony, or her people who are backing her, try to submit their testimony to this huge church council so that people can hear it and say whether or not she is, satanic, basically, which is the argument. And it's blocked from getting in. So it doesn't get to be taken up. But it's in that situation that Cusa presents Concordantia Catholica, which is the basis for the idea of the consent of the governed. Or in other words, it's the first presentation of that idea. He basically says, we're going to organize the church according to the principles of a republic. That's basically what he's doing. And he develops a whole weapon against Roman law, which is what's been keeping the whole thing tight, which is to say the laws are the laws, basically. And the people are, the laws are simply something that's basically set in stone. And the principle of reason of mankind, or of natural law, we don't take that up when it deals with Roman law. It's the same issue that's taken up in the Merchant of Venice, right? So he advances an idea of natural law. He says all law comes from human reason, and all relies on that, because human reason coincides with natural law, the reason of God, the unfolding of the universe according to the principles of God, according to universal principles. So he develops a way to oppose the methods that have been used to keep the whole thing tight, the whole oligarchical system tight. And this method that he develops, that's the same thing as international law from our standpoint. It's the same thing. And he develops in Didacta Ignorantia a way of getting out of the philosophical trap that has been created by Aristotle. And he creates the ability to actually do science. And it's from the standpoint of reaching higher principles that would allow you to, through experimentation. He's one of the first people who actually develops experimentation effectively in a way that would actually allow you to improve the conditions of the population. And he's getting into trouble the whole time. He's going on these huge long trips throughout Germany, for example, and he gets thrown into prison. They try to kill him. All these kind of things are happening. Then in 1453, Constantinople gets sacked by Mehmet II. And as Helga has pointed out, the reports are that it was absolutely brutal, but those are the reports. It's not clear if that's exactly what's happened. But in any case, the Turks take control. The Ottoman Empire takes control of Constantinople. And in that, he writes De Pace Fidei. Everyone else you can imagine is like calling for their heads on a pike, right? Like Vivek. And he says, no, the issue is we're creating a renaissance. That's what we're doing. We're changing the whole hypothesis of man. The whole concept of what mankind is, we're upgrading it to be more truthful. And that's how we have to approach this problem as well. And then what you may not know, Cusa dies on his way. I mean, it's kind of a tragic story because he's working with the Pope. Cusa becomes number 2 in the church. He's working with this guy who, again, I forget his name as a Pope, but his previous name is Piccolomini. He's a really interesting guy, really exciting. But they know what the Venetians are up to. And yet, the circumstances are not good enough to beat the Venetians. So Cusa dies on the way to the other side of Italy to meet up with the Pope, and the Pope is making an agreement with the Venetians. We need your help to stop the Turks, to stop the Ottomans. There's a tragic situation. It's not possible to see the project through in that moment. But who signs the death certificate? Does anyone know this? Toscanelli and a particular canon of Lisbon. Why is this important? Any idea? You got to get out of Europe. You got to get out of Europe. Okay? What did Toscanelli do? He made the map. Who gave the map to Columbus? The Canon of Lisbon. Cusa was the one who launched our nation, in truth. You know, in terms of this actual intention to create a republic. And they knew that you had to get out of Europe. LaRouche used to emphasize this all the time. The thing was sick with oligarchy. Now consider again the dynamic is different. We're in a different dynamic because we have the Belt and Road Initiative. We have the Global Civilization Initiative, right? It's not easy. It's extremely dangerous, but we're not in a situation, a tragedy that cannot be prevented, because there is a new paradigm that is already being developed, and it is already gathering steam. And that's what we got to do, is we got to bring that in. We got to bring in the best, the biggest, most beautiful ideas about the concordance of man's reason with the natural law, and carry that out as a dialogue among civilizations so that we can actually see this bear fruit and go to the best people that we meet in this potential mass strike moment and draw them into that process and organize the best conferences in the world, which is what Cusa did. He brought over the top translator of Plato from Constantinople and just planted him in Florence. He brought over the top people for doing science in Constantinople, all type of things like that. And he just got them going in one process to bring together the biggest, most powerful ideas. So that's what we're doing. That's what the Shell Institute conferences are designed to do. And that's what this campaign is designed to do, and what these meetings are designed to do is to develop that capability and have it go on out from here. So those are a few things to share about Cusa.
Can I sit, by the way?
It's fine with me. It's fine.
Okay.
I can see you.
Great. Well, hi, my name is Kynan Thistledoit. I'm a volunteer for Diane's campaign and a member of the LaRouche organization. And Diane's asked me to talk about this process of interventions that we've been launching, particularly in New York, but across the country. And really the poetic process behind it. Just to describe some of them, recently, our friend Robert, member of Diane's campaign, did a wonderful intervention against Hillary Clinton at Columbia University that got a wonderful amount of press, and it was actually his first intervention. So I applaud him for that. And recently, I've also had the opportunity to intervene against Adam Kinzinger, former congressman from Illinois and just all around dangerous war hawk. He actually wanted the United States to put American boots on the ground, say if Russia had used chemical or biological weapons in Ukraine. So just not a very good person, but I think just regarding the process, people would often ask, how do you stand up and go after these politicians? And I think that's the most important question, since the key to conducting a good intervention is the power to discover within yourself, the power of action. And when I thought about this, I was struck in particular by a paper written by Lyndon LaRouche called Politics as Art. And this was during the time, this was just before the election of George Bush, I think. And it covers this issue of classical tragedy as it was presented in ancient Greece and England. And I just want to read a part of it. And I think we can also show, Jose, the intervention against Kinzinger that I did later. But I'll just read this passage. It says, in all great classical tragedy, for example, from Aeschylus and Sophocles, through Shakespeare and Schiller, the tragic failure of the relevant leading figure, such as Shakespeare's Hamlet or the notorious Oedipus, has been his or her failure to change, willfully and radically, that destiny of a people which custom and related existing institutions of popular influence have brought upon it. The greatest crimes of political leaders and comparable figures are usually not their violation of custom, but their failure to violate custom in a manner specifically needed to prevent the people from plunging themselves and their posterity alike into some terrible calamity. Thus, the chief cause of the tragedy of nations and cultures is not that they violated custom or popular opinion, but that they continue to bow to the authority of those precedents and other habits much too long. So I guess when you're considering why you should take action in the name of safeguarding your nation, your republic, and acting on behalf of mankind as a whole, people need to study these tragedies of Shakespeare and Schiller because they demonstrate what actually happens when society refuses to act in a moral crisis. And of course, John F. Kennedy had said that the hottest places in hell are reserved for those in a period of moral crisis who maintain their neutrality. So I also one thing I've been particularly thinking about in respect to this is a speech that Martin Luther King gave in 1968. This was I believe it was just a few months before he was assassinated, but it had to do with the Vietnam War, which many people were silent about, and he had come out against it. So, and Robert actually mentioned this last time in the meeting. He says, I join you in this meeting because I'm in deepest agreement with the aims and work of the organization which has brought us together, clergy and laymen concerned about Vietnam. The recent statements of your executive committee are the sentiments of my own heart, and I found myself in full accord when I read its opening lines. Quote, "A time comes when silence is betrayal, and that time has come for us in relation to Vietnam." The truth of these words is beyond doubt, but the mission to which they call us is a most difficult one. Even when pressed by the demands of inner truth, men do not easily assume the task of opposing their government's policy, especially in time of war. Nor does the human spirit move without great difficulty against all the apathy of conformist thought within one's own bosom and in the surrounding world. Moreover, when the issues at hand seem as perplexing as they often do in the case of this dreadful conflict, we are always on the verge of being mesmerized by uncertainty, but we must move on. And some of us who have already begun to break the silence of the night have found that the call to speak is often a vocation of agony, but we must speak. We must speak with all the humility that is appropriate to our limited vision, but we must speak. And we must rejoice as well. For surely this is the first time in our nation's history that a significant number of its religious leaders have chosen to move beyond the prophesying of smooth patriotism to the high grounds of a firm dissent based upon the mandates of conscience and the reading of history. Perhaps a new spirit is rising among us. If it is, let us trace its movement and pray that our own inner being may be sensitive to its guidance, for we are deeply in need of a new way beyond the darkness that seems to close around us. Over the past 2 years, as I have moved to break the betrayal of my own silences and to speak from the burnings of my own heart, as I have called for radical departures from the destruction of Vietnam, many persons have questioned me about the wisdom of my path. As the heart of their concerns, this query has often loomed large and loud. Why are you speaking about the war, Dr. King? Why are you joining the voices of dissent? Peace and civil rights don't mix, they say. Aren't you hurting the cause of your people, they ask. And when I hear them, though I often understand the source of their concern, I am nevertheless greatly saddened, for such questions mean that the inquirers have not really known me, my commitment, or my calling. Indeed, their questions suggest that they do not know the world in which they live. So I think we should really consider that, take that, and we should also note that it was most likely King's courage to denounce Vietnam, which is what ultimately got him killed. So really, I mean, the situation is clear. You know, what Jewish Voices for Peace, I think, has been doing in particular with what happened at Grand Central in this wonderful demonstration that you had in the Cannon Building, which was characterized by singing. And I would say that was the most important part because it was clear what they were doing. I think we all need to take that up today, in every district. So I can close off with that. And yeah.
So they can show the intervention.
Sure. Oh yeah, we can show the intervention now too.
Congressman, I think the only thing we need to discuss here today is a need for a ceasefire in Gaza. Okay? November marks the killing of Yitzhak Rabin, who sought peace between Israel and Palestine. He said that if you wish for peace, it has to be through economic progress. He said that you don't get security with a tank or a helicopter or with weapons. You get it with hope. You get it with education. You get it with access to health care. That's what he promised the Palestinians. Okay? Why is it that 1 million young people in Palestine are going to die because the United States can't implement what was agreed to between Rabin and Arafat. We need a ceasefire now. We need a ceasefire. Are you okay? You called.
He's grabbing him by the throat. He's grabbing him by the throat. Whoa.
You're a warmonger. You're dangerous. Are you next?
The fact of the matter is that economic cooperation is the only solution to the conflict. There can be no final solution to the Palestinian question. We cannot have a final solution to the Palestinian question. We cannot have a final solution to the Palestinian question.
Yeah, that was in New York City. It was on, I think, on 65th and First Ave. It was actually a local synagogue nearby. Matta was actually there a week before at a crowd that was much larger. I think there were about 100, 150 people where I was. But also, if you're going to do these interventions, I would advise that you sit in the middle where a lot of older people are next to you, because you saw that those older people had to get up, so that gave me extra time to do what I needed to do. So, yeah.
Harder for security to reach.
Exactly.
Yes. Yes. So, any thoughts from us or from the room or questions? We can take a few minutes.
I think it's too bad that our champion for justice had to be bodily removed. The resistance actually contributed to the illusion that they were on the side of truth and justice. They actually defeated their own goal for suggesting that.
Right.
It's too bad it had to be that way. In fact, we should have had a voice of interest and concern for the well-being of the country, and that was denied.
Yeah.
I was also thinking about the moments, these
It's okay.
pivotal moments or iconic moments, or as exemplified in Martin Luther King's speech, and also in Cusa's life, Nicholas of Cusa, and our organizers, the organizers that are out there. But it's so powerful. It's so fraught. ... It is so loaded. It is so, but it is. It's profound and it's stunning, and I think it's also inspiring. What you were doing, Diane, too, and standing up for these ideas day in and day out. So, but I think we need to hold on to the pivot. There may be a better way of describing it, but you all alluded to it. You all referred to it in your speeches tonight. But we're facing it.
Yeah.
We are each facing it. We don't have to be a Nicholas of Cusa or Martin Luther King, but we each have to make a decision.
Exactly. I think that's what everyone has a sense of. I think that's why there's going to be tens of thousands of people in DC tomorrow, because do you really want to allow the death of hundreds of thousands of people on television in front of everyone, while you're here? How can you answer to that? And someone called me last night after the fireside chat and asked what I thought was the difference, because it's not, I mean, take 94, 95, 96, you had 3 million people killed in the Great Lakes region of Africa, Rwanda, Burundi, then Zaire. I was very much involved in it. It was totally gut-wrenching, but it wasn't, why didn't the world mobilize then? And they asked, was it that social media wasn't so advanced? That may have been part of it. But I also think we've come, you know, Schiller said there's a limit to a tyrant's power. We're at a certain threshold. And here in the West, everyone feels that they're hanging by a thread. That's something that I was really struck by in China. And I don't know about others of you who were there, but the population was calm. In fact, they were so calm that no one ran over anyone on the 10 million electric bikes that they had at every intersection, which I really could not figure out how they did those intersections. I mean, really, you should see the morning rush hour in Beijing. It is, and Chris said, well, it's because they're harmonious. He said that everybody knows that the other people are going somewhere, and somehow the electric bikes are delivering food and they only have 30 minutes to get there. So they run red lights all the time, but everyone knows that's going to happen. Anyway, I couldn't understand it because not a single person got run over in front of me, but it looked like they should have about every, but there was kind of, and no one got agitated like this thing we had here with the person honking their horn for 20 minutes or however long. You didn't. Here, everyone is so close to the edge that I was thinking about this parking ticket I got the other day when I was on a conference call. Someone texted me while I was on a conference call. So I said, all right, Diane, don't cause an accident, do the right thing, pull off the road and respond to the text. So I pulled into this parking place in a park, and the parking spot happened to have a meter at it. So I sat there, responded to the text. Meanwhile, a police car parks me in. Yes, parks me in, gets out of the car and comes up to my window, knocks on the window and gives me a ticket for parking. And I was saying, I didn't even get out of the car. I'm trying to obey the law and not text while I'm driving, and you're giving me a ticket. It was so outrageous. And then I was like, oh my gosh, who is this person? I was so mad. It was the first time I actually felt like doing violence to a police officer. And I was saying, who are you? And I was mad for about 30 minutes. And I felt like I had to pull over somewhere else so I wouldn't cause an accident because I was so angry. And then I thought, this is the mindset that everyone's driving around in this country. No wonder you have these crazy accidents, or you hear about neighbors shooting each other because their kid was playing basketball in the wrong place, so they come out and shoot every single person of the family next door. In other words, there's an incredible stress in the population. What were you going to say?
Yeah. One more thought. I've been reading a lot of Martin Luther King, some of the speeches, and also about his efforts in Montgomery and so on, and the training that was given to everybody that was fighting for civil rights is something we all need. It needs to be part of the organizers' training, but also somehow we need to take that out to the public, because people are on edge. I mean, that's crazy. And people, you stop, as Fred says, for a nanosecond, and the light has changed, and you barely moved your foot from the brake to the accelerator, and it's like a high jump. But but I don't need to get into that as much but we need to find ways to build the capacity to stand up and endure the rage that kicks up. And not be reactive.
Yeah, I have to tell the story.
Anymore.
No, I have to tell the story from this week. because we had such a good time. We've been operating on Columbia campus, as you know. And when we went out most recently, or the time before last, we were out on 116th, right in front of the gates. And we got a team of harassers who came up, as well as the doxing truck came up and parked right behind us. And the team of harassers were people who initially were sort of seemed to be thinking that they could come in and keep up a front of being sort of rational and poking holes in our arguments. But it was clear that their whole intention was to try to rattle us, try to get us to lose our composure. And very rapidly they betrayed their desperation, or I think insecurity, by starting to mock us or trying to gang up and so forth. And this proceeded, and despite their best efforts, more people flocked to the table to talk to us. So they got more and more enraged, and because their harassment wasn't functioning. And then right at the height of this whole pitch, Kainan and Michelle and Aska started to sing Shalom Haverim, which we began this with. And these harassers, first they started to cuss and froth, and then very, very rapidly they went off the stage. And and actually she Michelle had the best image of it, which is, do you remember in the Magic Flute there's a scene where Papageno plays the silver bells, and all of the goons who came along with the evil monostatos,
Wild animals.
And well, actually there's the same principle though, but all of the goons involuntarily start singing the song la 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 and dance off the stage. And it was just like that. So it's clear that music is central. Gives us the unity in beauty.
I thought it wasn't intentional, but because we didn't discuss what we were going to say before this meeting, we didn't discuss what we were going to say. But what I was reflecting on, the question of the Constitution and perfecting the Union, and Cusa's insight about the oneness of wisdom, it's just, and then of course the point that you have to move to the United States. The whole idea of the United States and e pluribus unum, at any rate, it just struck me how very, very coherent that was. And I think it's really important for Americans to consider that the principles expressed in our Declaration of Independence and Constitution are not quote unquote American principles. They are universal principles. That, and I'm not saying that to say that we are superior, I'm sort of saying the opposite, that if you actually believe that, then you have to believe that every nation has an equal right to sovereignty. Every human being has an equal right to the freedom to develop their mind and their talent. And that's what our nation is supposed to embody, which is why, in a sense, it's such an incredible ugliness that we have the current so-called leadership, which are not leaders, behaving as they are, because it's such an affront to what our nation actually is supposed to represent.
Yeah, there's a certain resonance to being in DC too, therefore, tomorrow for this big rally. When you go to the Lincoln Memorial, then you know what it actually means to be an American. I also think, Lynn was always focused on Ode to the West Wind by Percy Shelley. And the thing that we're trying to do with people, like, for example, these tens of thousands of people who come tomorrow, is to address the thing itself, which is the motion of the soul. It is creativity itself. The awakening of a relationship to natural law, I might say, and that principle is the thing that needs to be advanced. And yes, there are specific forms to that, like a ceasefire. But what we're actually talking about doing is dealing with that principle, that which comes like the west wind and moves the leaves around, and the motion of the soul that is fundamental. And if people can, I think what we're looking for are people who can see the great moral challenge of the moment, and they can feel this motion, and then recognize that it need be actualized by a sufficiently powerful intellectual basis, into a flowering of that principle. And the form of that is the principles of the next era of humanity.
I think that's also a really good way of describing the interventions process as well, like that with the West Wind, and really moving people to replicate that action in their own organizing in their own time. So I think it's a good image to use.
I'd say that the interventions that you guys do give voice to the voiceless, because I've had many of my Texans back home reach out to me, send me your videos, and I'm like, I know those guys. It's crazy. It gets to fly over America so quickly because they've been silenced.
Right.
Good. Well, I think we can conclude the live stream. For everyone who's watching online, if you already have not signed up for my emails, please do so. If you haven't donated your $3,300 legally, please donate as much as you can. This campaign needs funds. And I hope that everyone here will participate tomorrow, either in DC or in your city where you are. And again, I would encourage people to go and find the Nicholas of Cusa document, the Piece of Faith, on the Piece of Faith, De Pace Fide. There's a Schiller Institute translation, but the Jasper, can they just find that by looking up Jasper online?
If you do Jasper Hopkins, De Pace Fide, you got it.
So read that and nourish your soul. And thank you very much, Jose. You may sign